Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our session today. My name is Irene Kahacho. I am a clinical nutritionist working in the pediatric ward, and today we'll be looking at growth and development of the child. So our objectives for today is that by the end of the session, we'll be able to understand step-by-step development from conception, be able to understand the nutrients that are required in growth and development, to know when different milestones should be achieved, and then understand factors that can affect growth and development. So definition, so growth is basically the increase in size, composition, and distribution of tissues. So when you talk about growth, we are referring to increase in terms of weight, in terms of length or height, in terms of the head circumference, in terms of the mid-upper arm circumference. But when we refer to development, we talk about the unfolding of physical, cognitive, psychological, and social emotional skills that children should be able to meet as they continue developing. So growth basically begins from conception, and we know that just 24 hours after fertilization, cell division has already started. So with that starting of cell division, growth has already begun. And it occurs in 4 stages. We have infancy, we have preschool years, we have middle school, and we have adolescence. So we also have things that we call patterns of growth curve, because we have different growth curves relating to growth in different aspects. And the first one is the general curve that represents the overall growth of body and the systems. So this one basically refers to growth in terms of weight, linear growth in terms of weight, height, and then the growth of the 12 systems. So of some of the 12 systems, such as digestive, muscle mass, skeletal, respiratory, etc. So this general curve usually has 4 phases. The first phase is the rapid growth that occurs during infancy. So that is why we usually emphasize the first 1,000 days as being very, very important, because a lot of growth happens during that period. And that is why we say, as nutritionists, that is when the caloric and energy requirements are higher than any other time during a person's life. And then we have phase 2. So phase 2 growth is usually steady and consistent, and it happens during the middle childhood years. So they are not growing as fast as they were growing during infancy, but the growth is steady and consistent. The third phase is the rapid growth that happens during the adolescent growth spurt. So basically during a person's lifetime, you have 2 curves that have rapid growth, that is during infancy and during the adolescent growth spurt. And so when you talk about ensuring that you, like for example, ensuring that a child hits their height requirement by 2 years, if that is not done, you can take advantage of the adolescent growth spurt, and maybe they can be able to catch up in terms of their height. And then the final phase is the slow increase and eventual cessation of growth as they enter into adulthood. So those are the 4 phases in the general curve that basically represents growth of the body and systems. The second curve, we have the neural curve, and this one represents the growth of the brain, the nervous tissue, and associated structure. And 95% of this growth will have happened by 7 years of age. So they talk about that by the time a child is around 7 to 9 years, they have achieved the brain, almost 95% of the brain capacity of an adult, but they do not have the thinking or the judgment capacity that an adult has. But the size in terms of the cerebral matter, it is almost that one is of an adult. Then you have the genital curve. This is where the primary and the secondary sexual characteristics develop. And it is usually rapid during adolescence, because that is when sexual maturation and characteristics start showing. And then the last curve, we have the lymphoid curve. This basically involves development of the immunity. So organs that deal with the immunity. So we are talking about the lymph gland, talking about your thymus, the appendix, tonsils, all those things that are involved in immunity. And rapid growth is during infancy and childhood, and maximum by 12 to 13 years, immunity is achieved. And that is why I usually say, especially for children below 5 years, their immunity has not fully developed. That is why they are prone to illnesses and diseases. So those are the 4 patterns of growth curve: the general curve, the neural curve, the genital curve, and the lymphoid curve. So let us talk about growth after conception. After conception happens, how does the different systems and the different organs, when do they develop, and so on and so forth. So in the first trimester, the fertilized egg changes from a small grouping of cells to a fetus that is starting to have a baby's feature. And in the first month, that is the first week to the 4th week, the primitive face, the lower jaw, the mouth, the throat, they start to develop, and the formation of the neural tubes also starts. As we all know, the neural tube usually forms within the first 28 days, and the way you count it is from the first day of the last time they got their menstrual period. So the first time they got their menstrual period last, from that day, 28 days forward, by then the neural tube will already be formed. In month 2, that is weeks 5 to 8, the neural tube by now is usually very well formed, and facial features continue to develop, and the digestive tract and sensory organs also begin to develop, and bone starts to replace cartilage. As you all know, bones come from cartilage, so the cartilage will have formed before this, and then by the time they are 8 weeks, they are starting to have some bone formation. And then after 8 weeks, is now referred to as the fetus, and usually will weigh about a third of an ounce, and is usually 1 inch long. So it's very small still, but some of the structures and organs have already started to develop. In month 3, that is weeks 9 to 12, the limbs, the fingers and toes are usually well formed. The fetus can open and close their fists and mouth, and they're able also to sort of drink amniotic fluid, and that is how they also taste some of the food that the diet that the mom is taking also. The external ears are usually formed, and the beginnings of teeth start to develop as well. So reproductive organs are developing, but you cannot distinguish gender yet. So even if you went for an ultrasound by this time, they cannot tell you what the gender of the baby will be, but the reproductive organs are already developing. The circulatory and urinary systems are working, and the liver already is usually producing bile, and then the fetus will weigh about 1 ounce and is usually 4 inches long. So after 12 weeks, that's when they say the pregnancy is basically safe. The chances of getting a miscarriage are harder. So because the fetus is more developed by this time. So in the second trimester, in the 4th month, that is weeks 13 to 16, the heartbeat is audible on what we call butterfly ultrasound. They can hear the heartbeat of the fetus. The eyelids, the eyebrows, the eyelashes, the nails, they are all well formed by now, and then the teeth and bones start to become denser. Remember, in week 8, they were already replacing cartilage with bone, and then by now it's becoming denser. The nervous system usually starts to function at around this time, and the genitals are well formed and can be distinguished in an ultrasound. And then by the end, the fetus is 4 ounces and 6 inches long. In the 5th month, week 17 to 20, the fetus start moving around because their muscles are now developing more. And the first movement is usually called a quickening, and it feels like a flutter. It's something very soft, but it is called a quickening. And then the shoulders, the back, the temples are covered by a type of hair that is called lanugo. And this one is usually shed by the first week of life. So that's why you find sometimes a newborn can have hair around their shoulders, they can have hair around their temples and all that. And especially if you work in nursery, you will notice most of the prems will have a lot of hair around those areas because they have not fully developed. So for them, the lanugo will take a little bit of time to be shed off, but it is normal. It is meant for protection. They also have a whitish covering around their skin that protects them from long exposure to amniotic fluid, and it is called a vanic caseosa. So if you've seen a brand new newborn baby, they usually, if they're not fully wiped completely, they'll have areas that they have whitish substance. And if they are not wiped at all, after a few days, at around day 3 or day 4, it looks like their skin is peeling. Their skin is not usually peeling. It is this whitish covering that is starting to shed. By the end of the 5th month, the fetus weighs about half to 1 pound and is 10 inches long. So in month 6, weeks 21 to 24, the eyelids begin to part and eyes are open, and they can respond to sound by moving or increasing the pulse. So if a fetus is born around this time, if you have a neonatal ICU, they can be able to survive. But if their eyelids had not parted, they usually say prognosis is very guarded. So if a prem is born within 21 to 24 weeks, most nurseries in Kenya will not take below 22 weeks because by then the eyelids have not parted completely. But if you have a vibrant NICU, they can be able to survive and continue growing. In month 7, that is week 25 to 28, they start to develop fat reserves, and they can now hear completely, and they're able to change position frequently and respond to stimuli. So by this time also the amniotic fluid begins to diminish, and at the end of 7 months, the fetus weighs about 2 to 4 pounds and is 4 inches long. So if a fetus is born at around this time, survival and prognosis is better than if they are born at month 6. So, but also you need a very vibrant, either high dependency unit or an neonatal ICU, because they'll need to be under monitoring for quite a while. In month 8, 29 to 32 weeks, they continue developing more fat reserves, and that is why by this time they weigh a little bit more, and then the brain develops very rapidly. Remember, fat is very important in brain development. So because they are developing more fat reserves, their brain also continues developing rapidly, and the fetus can now see and hear. And then the lungs are immature, but most of the internal organs have well developed. And that is why you find that if a prem is born below 32 weeks of age, number one, they have what we call apneic episodes, where they forget to breathe, and they might also require oxygen for quite a while because their lungs are still immature. By the end, the fetus is about 5 pounds and is 18 inches long. In month 9, that is 33 to 36 weeks or early term, they have coordinated reflexes, they can blink, they can close their eyes, they can grasp firmly, and they can move their head from side to side, and they are about 5.5 to 6.5 pounds and 17 to 19 inches long. So if a fetus is born during this time, they take very less time in the nursery, and the growth continues rapidly because they have almost fully developed. And then in month 10, because we count term pregnancy as having 40 weeks, so they don't count it in terms of months, because if you look at it in terms of months, then by month 9 the baby should be born. But if you count in terms of weeks, term pregnancy is up to 40 weeks. But if they're born at 37 weeks, from 37 weeks it's acceptable. From 40 weeks, they say it's now late gestation. So in the 10th month, no growth is happening here. So what happens basically is that they change their position in preparation for birth. So the head sort of goes down to facing the cervix so that it can make birth a bit easier. So the fetus around here is 7 pounds and is 18 to 20 inches long. So that is the systematic growth from conception all the way to during birth. So you can see that growth does not happen when they are born. It happens from when they are conceived. So what nutrients do they require during pregnancy? That are required during pregnancy to ensure that this growth, especially in utero, continues to happen. Number one, when we look at the energy requirements of the mom, so you have to determine, first of all, was the mom having good nutrition status pre-pregnancy? Because that will determine how the baby continues to grow. If they had a normal nutrition status, the energy requirements, they require just an extra 300 kilocalories per day. And then if you restrict their energy so much, they can have late gestation where they go beyond 41 weeks gestation because the baby still needs a little more time to continue growing. They can also have what we call IUGR, or intrauterine growth retardation or restriction, where a baby is born term, but when you look at their parameters, they almost seem like a prem. So when you talk about intrauterine growth retardation, we have symmetrical and an asymmetrical. So you basically look at their head circumference, their weight, and their length. So if the head circumference is okay, the prognosis is usually okay because it means the brain has developed adequately. But if the head circumference is below the 10th percentile, even if the weight and the height are okay, it means this child already they are starting from a negative in life. And they can also give birth to small for gestational age babies. So if 20% of energy is protein, this results in them having infants with an increase in birth weight and length as well. And then the second thing that we look at is iron. So we know iron is very important during pregnancy for formation of blood that allows for distribution of nutrients and oxygen to the fetus as it continues to grow. So if a mom has iron deficiency without anemia, where they have, when you look at their CBC or their full blood film, the HB is okay, but when you look at their MCV, it is low. So they have iron deficiency, but without anemia because the HB is okay. So this leads to risk of small for gestational age, preterm infant, and then there is an increased risk of infant mortality and an increased risk of cognitive dysfunction. So that is why we emphasize that they have to take their IFAS. If they have iron deficiency with anemia, this can result in preterm labor, can result to a low birth weight. Low birth weight means a baby born with weighing less than 2,500 grams, and you can also have them getting iron deficiency, the children getting iron deficiency in infancy. So we know that breast milk basically has low to no iron, so the infant usually takes reserves to take them through the first 6 months of life. So if the mom is having iron deficiency anemia, it means this baby, when they were born, they were also didn't get enough reserves. So you get a baby who is about 2 months old, already showing signs of iron deficiency that we do not expect at that age. The third thing that they require is folic acid, and as we said, the neurotube usually forms within the first 4 weeks or the first 28 days of life from conception. And we emphasize that any woman of childbearing age should be taking folic acid supplementation at least 3 months before conception, because by the time 1 month is over, most people do not know that they are pregnant. So by the time they start taking their IFAS, the neurotube has already developed. If they were getting neurotube defects, the defect has already occurred. So you cannot reverse it at that point. So if they have folic acid deficiency, can lead to neurotube defects. So you get a baby born with spina bifida. If they're born with spina bifida, they might have what they call an omphalocele, or sort of, it looks like a swelling at the back of the at the back, or they can have a dimple, or they can have tufts of hair. So it looks like they have hair in the back, in their lower back. And they can also be born with hydrocephalus. That is why it is important to do serial head circumference checks, which is a thing most of us don't do a very good job at. We are very good in taking weight, sometimes height, but head circumference almost never. And it is important for you to be able to identify hydrocephalus. The fourth nutrient that is important is iodine, which is very important for brain development. So deficiency during pregnancy results in low IQ, or a baby can be born with what we call cretinism, and they can also be born with low birth weight. So that is why the government has iodized our salt, but iodine, you can't, when you store your salt, you have to store it in an airtight container. Otherwise, if you just leave it on the table, iodine will just evaporate. So it's important to encourage moms to use iodized salt. And then the last one is vitamin D. So if they have vitamin D deficiency, so vitamin D is another nutrient that breast milk lacks. And what some countries, especially in the West where they experience winter, what they do is they give their infants about 400 international units of vitamin D every day to make sure that they don't get either vitamin D deficiency or rickets. We don't do that in Kenya because we like preaching the gospel of basking in the sun, but most mothers will not take their children out to bask. So if they have vitamin D deficiency, the children will be born with a reduced bone mineral content. There is risk for small for gestational age or low birth weight, and then neonatal hypocalcemia and seizures. So sometimes if there's a birth trauma, infants that are born can experience seizures. But if there was no birth trauma and you have an infant who is having seizures or hypocalcemia, it is good to investigate with the mom. Could the mom be having vitamin D deficiency, which is a very high probability at that point. And then they can also have impaired brain development. So that is for conception. So what happens after they are born? So post-pregnancy growth. So soon after birth, term infants will lose about 5 to 10% of their birth weight, and it is usually expected, and prems can lose all the way up to around 15%. But this should be regained by 1 to 2 weeks post-birth, and from that point forward, expected weight gain is around 1% of their birth weight. So if they were born at 3 kilos, they should gain 30 grams daily. If they were born at 2,500 grams, they should gain 25 grams daily. If they're born at 4 kilos, they should gain 40 grams daily. And then they should grow by 1.5 to 2.5 centimeters a month. So by 4 to 6 months, we expect that infants have doubled their birth weight. So that is an easy way of assessing whether they are growing appropriately. But as we all know, weight for age basically doesn't show you evidence. There's no evidence for malnutrition. It just shows you that they're underweight. So you need to do more investigations like a weight for length score or something like that. And then from 6 to 12 months, they grow by around 1 centimeters in terms of height a month, and they gain 85 to 140 grams a week. So from 6 months, growth has slowly gone down a little bit, so it is not as rapid. The most rapid growth happens the first 3 months of life, and then from there it goes down a little bit. So, but they should triple their birth weight by 1 year. And then by the time they are 1 to 2 years, they gain only 2.2 kilos a year. And then and that growth rate continues. That is why we said from around 2 years, the preschool and the middle school years, growth is steady but consistent. So in infancy and preschool years, between the ages of 3 to 6, they gain about 1.8 to 2.25 grams a year, and 5 to 7.5 centimeters a year. And by this time, they have 20 primary teeth by 3 years, and they have 20/20 vision by 4 years, meaning by 4 years, a child should be able to see very clearly. And that is why we emphasize vitamin A supplementation every 6 months until they are 5 years. And then also encouraging them to take their colors, basically their brightly colored vegetables and fruits. So what about their energy and nutrient requirements during this time? So we have two types of nutrients. The type 1 nutrients are basically essential for biochemical processes. They do not affect growth as much, but they are very, very important for biochemical processes. And these ones include things like copper, iron, selenium, the B vitamins, calcium. And if a child is deficient of this, they'll continue to grow, but they might experience metabolic dysfunction, because then the biochemical processes are not happening as they should. And then we have type 2 nutrients. These ones are referred to as growth nutrients, and they are required for nearly all biochemical pathways. So if a child has mild deficiency, what you will see is that they will start getting stunted, but they are not growing in height. That is why we say growth monitoring in terms of the weight and the height is very important. So when you see a halt or like they are not growing as they should, you can be able to intervene early. And then if the deficiency is profound, that is when wasting happens. So yeah, and these ones include magnesium, phosphorus, sodium, zinc, water, energy, sulfur, and essential amino acids. So we have two types of nutrients, the type 1 and the type 2. So their energy needs, they are increased during growth, especially the first 3 months. And during infancy is, as I said, is when you have the highest requirement for energy and calories than any other time in your lifetime. So by month 1 to 3, they require 35% of total energy to be basically those calories that they require. And then it goes decreasing. At 6 months, they require just less than 6%. By 12 months, they require it to be 3%. 2 years, they require it to be 2%. And then mid-adolescence, 1 to 2% of total energy for it to be carbohydrates. So the calories from month 1 to 3, they require around 100 to 120 kcals if they were born term. If they were born prem, they require a little bit more. By the time they are 1 year, it has decreased to around 100 to 105 kcals per kilo per day, and that goes decreasing as they continue growing. So what about milestones for infancy and preschool years and a little bit of middle childhood? So when we talk about milestones, we have physical developmental milestones and social and emotional milestones. When we look at physical developmental milestones, so we have different milestones that they should achieve. The first one is head and neck control. So by the time a baby is around a month, they should be able to lift their head part way up, and then by the time they are 2 months, they should hold the head up briefly. By the time they are 4 months, they should hold the head high, up and well. By the time they are 5 months, they should hold the head and the shoulders for a longer period of time. By the time they are 6 months, they are turning their head and they shift their weight. By 9 months, they hold the head well. When you lift them up, the head is not dropping. They're able to hold their head and neck. And then by 1 year, they are moving and holding head easily in all directions. So for rolling, by 3 months, they roll belly to back. That's why children should not be put in just one position. So they should be able to roll belly to back. By 6 months, they are rolling back to belly. So if you put them on their back, they're able to roll to their belly. By around 9 months, they roll over and over easily in play. Like when they are playing, if they have a toy, they're able to roll from side to side. When we talk about sitting, by the time they are 2 months, they sit only with full support. By this time, you should not sit them without support because their back is not fully supported. By 4 months, though, they should be able to sit with some support. Like if you put some things around them, they should be able to sit with that support. By 5 months, they sit with hand support. So they sit and then like the hands are in front of them. It's what is holding their weight down. By 7 months, they 6 to 7 months, they are sitting without support. By 10 months, they sit very well without support. And then by a year to 2 years, they twist and move easily when sitting. For crawling and walking, by 3 months, they begin to creep. So like they are reaching for something, but they are not crawling yet. By 6 months, they scoot or they crawl. By 9 months, they pull to standing. Like if they had a chair in front of them, they can hold onto that chair and pull themselves into a standing position. By 1 year, they are taking steps with support or without support. And then from 1 year to 2 years, they walk. And by the time they're 2 years, they are running. By the time they are 3 years, they can walk on tiptoes and on their heels, so they can support their weight on the tiptoes and in their heels. And then by about 4 years, they walk easily backward. So if they can walk easily backward. And then by 5 years, they can hop on one foot. For arm and hand control, so at 1 month, they grip the finger. So they have a grip. Like if you put your finger into their hand, they can be able to grasp onto it. By the time they are 4 months, they reach towards objects because by this time they're already creeping. And then by 6 months, they reach and grasp with whole hand. And sometimes they can be able to, by 9 months, move that object from one hand to the other. And then by 2 years, they are grasping with thumb and forefinger, meaning they don't now require their whole hand to hold on to things. And then by the time they are 3 years, they easily move fingers back and forth from nose to moving object. And then by 5 years, they are throwing and catching balls. So for seeing, by the time they are a month, they follow close with close objects with eyes, because this time they don't see very far. Remember, they don't yet have 20/20 vision. So they follow close with close objects with eyes. By 4 months, they enjoy bright colors and shapes. By 6 months, they recognize different faces. So this is when you'll notice that a child now can recognize mom and dad and so on. By 9 months, their eyes can focus on a far object because now their vision is improving. By a year and a half, they can look at small things or pictures. And then between 2 to 3 years, they see small shapes clearly at 6 meters. And then by 5 years or by 4 years, we say they have 20/20 vision, so they should be able to see even far objects. For hearing, at 1 month, they move or cry at a loud noise. Like if you were maybe to bang a door, they would be able to respond to that sound. By 3 months, they are turning their head to sounds. Like if you call them or do something, they can be able to turn their head. By 4 months, they respond to the mom's voice. That is like if you soothe them, they are able to respond. And then by 7 months, they enjoy rhythmic music. So like if you were to put friendly cartoon that has music, they can be able to like wobble along or something. By 1 year, they understand simple words. And then by 2 years, they hear clearly and they understand the most simple language. For social development, for communication and language, 1 month they cry when wet or hungry. By 3 months they coo when comfortable. By 6 months they make simple sounds, so they baby talk, what we call baby talk. By 9 months they use certain sounds for different things. By a year, between a year and 2 years, they begin to use simple single words, like they can say mama, baba. By between 3 years and 5 years, they are now making simple sentences. Social behavior, at 2 months, a baby should have a social, what we call a social smile. When smile, that they should be able to smile back. By 8 months, they begin to understand and respond to no. By a year, they begin to do simple things when asked. So if a child is doing something and you tell them stop, they're able to understand on that. And then from 2 years to 3 years, they like being praised after completing simple tasks. And then at 3 years, they interact with both adults and children. I'll not go through all of them. Let me just look at play and intelligence and learning. So play, as we said, at around 2 months, they are grasping things when placed into hand. By 4 months, they are playing with own body. That's when you find like an infant is able to like hold their leg and bring it up like that. By 6 months, they play with simple objects. Like if you were to give them a toy, you can play with it. By 9 months, they begin to enjoy social games. Like if you were to do peekaboo, they can be able to respond to that. By a year, they imitate and copy people. And then 2 years, they begin to play with other children. And by 3 years, they can play independently with children and toys. And for intelligence and learning, at 1 month, they cry when hungry or uncomfortable. At 3 months, they recognize the mom. By 6 months, they recognize several people. By 9 months, they look for toys that fall out of sight. By a year, they copy simple actions. By 2 years, they point to things when asked. By 3 years, they follow simple instruction. Yes, same as 5 years. So that is how we expect that their development should happen. So what are the windows of opportunity to achieve these milestones? So for motor development or physical development, you want to target the prenatal to 6 years old. For emotional control, from birth to 2.5 years old. For social attachment, from birth to 2.5 years old. For vocabulary, for 0 to 3 years old. That's why we say even if you're interacting with children, don't talk to them like children. Sometimes they can comprehend and understand sentences and things that are not said in baby talk. For math and logic, from less than a year to around 3.5 years old. So let us look at brain development. So the brain development process is the process that is involved in brain formation. So it includes the formation of brain cells and cell migration and differentiation to formation of synaptic connections. So by the time a neonate is completing 4 weeks, they have around 36% of adult cerebral volume. By 1 year, they have 72% of adult volume. By 3 years, they have 80%. And by 9 years, they have 90 to 92% adult volume. That is why we said from 7 to 9 years, their brain is almost the size of an adult, but they do not have the capacity to think or to act like an adult, but their brain size is almost as that of an adult. So the brain volume achieved by 1 year, it dictates later intelligence. So if by 1 year they have not achieved that 72%, they might have a lower IQ and low intelligence as they go on with life. So what is the role of nutrition in brain development? So amino acids, they serve as precursors of neurotransmitters such as serotonin or the feel-good hormone. So that is why we emphasize that children should have adequate protein intake, because the amino acids that they get from that is very important in the formation of neurotransmitters. For essential fatty acids, they serve as structural components of tissues, cell membrane synthesis, in neurodevelopment and sensory maturation. So as we have said, that fats are very important, especially essential fatty acids, very important in brain development. For the low chain polyunsaturated fatty acids, they help in the maturation of cortical functioning in early life, and deficiency can lead to attention deficit. So if children lack long chain polyunsaturated fatty acid, they can have what we call attention deficit. They cannot concentrate for long. And then lack of DHA, what is called choleic acid, can lead to poor growth and development and function of brain and eyes. So breast milk usually has DHA, and we emphasize that if a child is not using breast milk and they have been switched to formula, ensure that it is it has DHA. DHA is an is an omega-3 fatty acid that is very important for brain development. So let us look at growth in middle school. So because a lot of growth happens within the first few years, that is where the bulk of our discussion for today was. So from here on, it's smooth sailing. So growth in middle school, we said by this time it is steady and consistent, but it is not as rapid as before. So by this time, they start to improve in their motor skills because growth has sort of slowed down. So they're able to improve their motor skills. That is the physical aspect of development. Like when you talk about playing sports, running, things like those, this is when they improve on them. And then we expect them to gain about 2 kilos and they grow about 2 inches in height per year. So as you can see, 2 kilos a year is very few grams a month. So we don't expect that by now they're also gaining a kilo as they did during infancy. No, growth has sort of slowed down a little bit. So they tend to slim down and they gain muscle strength and lung capacity. So during this time also what happens is the bones start to elongate. So a child who seemed chubby can now appear slimmer, but it is because maybe their bones have elongated, so they appear slimmer because their weight has now been distributed further. And then they have muscle strength and lung capacity and can engage in strenuous physical activity. And then, as we said, brain development by ages 7 to 9 is an adult size, but it is not fully developed. For milestones, for physical milestones, we expect them to have less coordination. So when you look at like a 6-year-old running, they run like a person who is drunk. Like they can run very fast, but they don't run very straight in a straight line because they have less coordination. But then they continue getting better at fine motor and gross motor movements, and then they develop strength and endurance because of increased muscle mass, and they tend to do better at sports during this time. For cognitive development, they start to understand the concepts of concepts like influence and power. This is where you find like sometimes bullying starts, because now they can understand power and the influence that they have over their friends. Yeah, and then they start to question everything. If you have ever encountered a 6-year-old, you tell them something and then they'll ask why do I have to do it? Why does it work that way? So they question everything. They don't take things at face value. And then they're able to memorize information easily, and they're able to use flexible thinking. So if they were involved in a task and whatever solution they were trying to employ does not work, they're able to switch to other solutions. And then they begin to develop a worldview and a basic set of values. For language, they can use metaphors and understand metaphors. They are interested in having discussions and debates and arguments. And they start to get and pay attention to body language. So they don't take at what you say with your mouth to be everything. They also are able to pay attention to body language as well. And they go through what-if scenarios, and they start to write and describe personal experience. So like this is a good time to have them like start journaling and things like that. For social and emotional development, they start to bow to peer pressure. So if a child was a particular way and now they have gone to school, their friends are this way, they tend to bow to peer pressure. And then they can experience bullying because we say they understand concepts of influence and power. And they are very sensitive to other people's opinions. And then they start to keep secrets, not because that the secret they keep is so big, but because they just want to know that they have a secret. And then they are introspective and very moody. So those are the milestones for middle childhood. So let us look at adolescence. So adolescence basically is just a growth spurt that happens in terms of, and most of the changes that happen here is the development of and maturation of sexual characteristics. So when you look at boys, their start of puberty is 9.5 years to 14 years old. And what happens during that time is that their testicles, they enlarge. And then 1 year after their testicles enlarge, they have penis enlargement. By 13.5 years old, they develop pubic hair. And they start, by 14, they start to experience wet dreams. And then at about 15 years old, they have hair under arms, face, their voice changes, they can have acne, and so on. For girls, their start of puberty is usually earlier, and that is why by the end of middle childhood, most girls are bigger and taller than boys, because their growth spurt, the adolescent growth spurt starts before the boys. So their puberty starts from 8 to 13 years old, sorry. And the first thing to happen is that breast develop, and then they develop pubic hairs shortly after. By 12 years old, they have hair under arms, and menstrual periods start between 16.5 years old. So for nutrition requirements is number one, what you can use during this time, you need to continue using the weight and the height, but also remember that growth is happening very rapidly. So you can do what we call a BMI for age to determine if they're growing appropriately, but the nutrients that they require is that they have an increased energy requirement, they have an increased protein requirement, which is again very, very individualized, because based on how they grew in childhood, it will determine how then you give them these nutrients during adolescence. But for girls, it's universal. They require a lot of iron because now they have started experiencing menstrual periods. And I think as a country, we need to maybe start thinking of even doing blanket supplementation of folic acid, because we see a lot of early pregnancies that happen, and these children, I know all they want to eat is chips and soda, so they might be folic acid deficient, and you don't want them to give birth to children with spina bifida or hydrocephalus. So for their milestones, so they also bow down to peer pressure. So for the physical milestones, they have, by adolescence, they should have met all their physical milestones. All that is changing is basically their height and their other sexual characteristics. But for social and emotional milestones, they also bow down to peer pressure. They should be able to make decisions under guidance. And then they should also be able to understand right and wrong and things like this. So what factors affect growth and development? So the first one is poor nutrition. We looked at the two types of nutrients that are involved. And if they have deficiency of type 2 nutrients, or they have inadequate caloric intake, that can lead to reduced growth. The second thing is frequent illnesses. So illness can affect both growth and development. So if a child is in and out of the hospital, remember, an illness is a stressful period. And most of the time, if you are sick, your body relies on your reserves to be able to meet the increased requirements during that time. And most children do not have those reserves. So what happens is whatever little they take will be deployed to meeting those needs, so no growth basically happens. And sometimes they even become wasted and stunted if it is very extreme. Also, what can happen during an illness is that children can have delayed milestones. So if a child was starting to crawl, almost standing with support, they now sort of stop doing that because they are sick. But delayed milestones can be worked on. What should worry you more is what we call regressed milestones. Regressed milestones basically mean if a child was doing something and now they cannot do it anymore. So if you have a child who was crawling, but now they cannot crawl anymore. If they were standing, they cannot stand anymore, even with support. So that should be more worrisome, because it means whatever has happened is not an acute thing. Regressed milestones don't just happen. It means something has been happening for a while, and you need to engage a pediatrician and other players that will look at to ensure that those children are helped. The other thing that can lead to affect growth and development is poor sanitation and hygiene. So linear growth is very, very much affected by wash practices. So when you see a child coming to you, they are not gaining weight, you've put them on all nutrition implementations that you can think of, but they are still not growing. Remember to ask them about sanitation and hygiene. Ask them about their sources of water. Ask them about where they go to the toilet, how many people share that, because that affects linear growth in terms of their weight and their height. And then the other one is endocrine issues. So sometimes you can be providing a child with all the nutrition that they require, but if they do not have the endocrine capacity to be able to deal with that energy the way that they should, growth and development will also be affected. Like, for example, if they have hypothyroidism, hypothyroidism can lead to what we call failure to thrive. Basically, this child does not grow, no matter how much they eat. So for those ones, they need to be on treatment. And something I want you to remember is every day that a child with hypothyroidism goes without treatment, they lose about 5 IQ points. So hypothyroidism is very, very important to be able to identify early and start treatment early. And then the other one is impaired growth hormone levels. So in malnutrition, one of the things that are affected is the thymus and the growth hormone. So the growth hormone will be increased in malnutrition in efforts to try to get this child to grow. So should you do a growth hormone level in a child that is malnourished and it is not increased, that is very, very worrisome. So those are the things that can happen, that can make a child basically not grow. The other one I talk about pure nutrition is rickets that has led to delayed milestones in terms of crawling, walking. So if you have a child who cannot walk by 1 year, the first thing you think about that happens more frequently is rickets. So it's good to keep that at the back of your mind. So what can be done to make sure that we mitigate these things early? So number one, consistent growth monitoring and plotting in appropriate growth curves. So we said from the time they are born all the way to 5 years, if possible, have them weighed especially the first 2 years, a weight every month and a length every month or a height every month, so that you can see when did we start, did the curve start going down, or when did did it start plateauing, meaning we're just in the same spot for several months. The second thing, you can check lab values of things like calcium, HB, growth hormone, TSH, T4, T3, to be able to know what is causing this child not to grow. So sometimes if a child has delayed milestones, basic things that you can do, a calcium and a bone profile assessment. So you look at their ALK force to see how is the bone able to work with the minerals that you're giving it. So you check an ALK force, and if you are in a facility that has the capacity, you can check a TSH and a T4, so that if they are low, you start them on treatment early. The other one is screening for hearing, especially for social and other and emotional milestones. So if a child does not have a social smile, if they do not coo, if they do not have baby talk, if they do not respond to loud sounds, they should get a hearing screen done, so they can determine, do they have a hearing problem or something like that. And then the other one is refer to relevant therapists. So if you have a physiotherapist, an occupational therapist, a speech therapist, if there's speech delay and all that, but most importantly, a multidisciplinary team approach where you have different, because a child with delayed milestones will not have just one thing. They will come with sometimes it's malnutrition or some form of, even if it's not malnutrition in terms of acute malnutrition, they might have come with some form of deficiency, and then they have the delay. Most of the time they'll have a medical problem and so on. So you require a multidisciplinary team approach. So in Kenya, developmental care is something that is still improving. I think we have very few developmental doctors. I think there's one in Aga Khan that just sees children with developmental delay issues. But in a facility that you work in, you can start what we call a developmental clinic. Like in the facility that I work in, we have a developmental clinic where we have children with delayed milestones come under one roof, get seen by the pediatrician, by the nutritionist, by audiology, by physio and occupational therapist. Because when you do that, a team approach means that the results will be better and they will be achieved fast. And then when you see a child with delayed milestones, remember, don't just talk to them about calcium. Take milk, take yogurt, take what? Especially if they have rickets, most likely they'll have vitamin D deficiency. It is not the calcium that they lack, it is vitamin D that they require. So maybe look into maybe giving them a vitamin D injection or something like that. Yes, thank you so much. That is our time. I'd like now to invite our panelists to discuss further. Asanteni. Eva?
A very good presentation, Gathoni. I have also learned a lot.
Gift? Do you have gift around?
I have one question though.
Mm-hmm.
Is the properties of breast milk, is it the same at when you give birth and at 6 months? Because I had a question by a mother that she wants to store milk because she was going back to work at starting to express at around 1 month. Can she still feed the baby at 3 months the same breast milk that she fed the baby at 1 month?
Okay. So I think those are two questions in one. So number one, breast milk, yes, it can be stored. If you are storing it in the freezer, it can go up to 6 months. So if she has a freezer that she's going to freeze the milk in, that milk she can use even when the baby is like 6 months from the date of expression. But if she's just storing it in the refrigerator, unfortunately, that only goes for 72 hours. And then to answer your other question, yes, I think there are differences in breast milk because we say the first 6 months of life, breast milk provides 100% nutrition, meaning everything that they require, all their requirements, breast milk is giving 100%. But from around 6 months, we say it gives 70%. That is why we emphasize the introduction of complementary feeding. So I don't think there is harm in giving milk that she expressed when baby was 1 month, because by then their stomach capacity is still very small, and maybe she has a lot of milk so she can store it and use it later. Yeah, but also at 6 months she needs to introduce other feeds as well, because at that point breast milk is not providing the requirements for the baby.
Thank you.
Any other question? Kagecha.
Gathoni, that was a nice presentation. I don't think I have a question really, but maybe just to ask, they say when a mother gives birth, then they give you a lot of fluid, say uji, porridge, or drinking chocolate, Milo. They say it is the milk. Is that a myth or is it true?
It is not a myth. I always tell lactating mothers that if you are dehydrated, there is no way you can be able to produce milk. You cannot give from empty. So that is the essence from where the fluid requirements come in. Because we actually emphasize fluid requirement more than even, I'm not saying more than food intake really, but it's not them to like eat all the time. Yes, they need to get their extra 500 calories, but fluids are the most important, because if they are dehydrated, they cannot be able to produce milk. So it is not a myth. Penina?
Thanks, Gadoni. That was quite good. It was a long one. I can imagine the many slides you had. You've learned a lot for those. You had so many slides, and I believe every one of us has learned, if not two, one thing at least, and we should be able to apply it in our various areas, in our various facilities. Thank you.
All right, I don't think there are any questions. Neema, you have something?
I have learned a lot. Thank you so much for your presentation. My question could come in another way. What if maybe the child is developing faster, is achieving the milestones faster than the normal rate? Is it also okay?
That is perfectly fine. Like you find sometimes these are just guidelines to guide you by when, like the limit by when they should be able to achieve the milestones, but there are children who basically develop faster. Like you can find a 9-month-old who talks, or a 6-month-old who can stand with support, and so on and so forth. So what we worry about is the delay and the regressing milestones. But if they are developing faster, I don't think there is harm in that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. Our take away message is, I hope we'll all be able to identify children that have delay and be able to refer them to relevant people so they can get help. Santini.